Hello, fifth grade. We are going to be working through another novel together for the next few weeks. This novel is called Jim Ugly, and it is about a boy and a dog who are alone in the frontier west. So today we will be reading chapter 1, which is titled The Pine Box. I was hiding in the tall weeds. It was about the only place on the desert to hide from everybody. I remember when we first came to Blowfly, Nevada. My dad squinted one eye at the flat countryside and said, "Jake, I believe if you climbed a tree, you could see clear to Mexico, if you could find a tree." I looked up at the hot, windy sky and watched a lone chicken hawk drifting like a speck of dust hunting. Yesterday there had been a pair of them. I wondered what had happened to the other. Someone might have taken a shot at it. I wondered if the birds of prey grieved. I turned over and thought about what was going to happen to me and to Dad's dog, Jim Ugly. Jim Ugly was a big, sandy mongrel, part elk hound, part something else, and a large helping of short-eared timber wolf. There was wolf in his throat, too, for he never barked. He might yip or bay or wolf howl, but mostly he was silent. I'd never seen such a quiet, keep-to-himself dog. You just never knew when he was going to behave like a dog or like a wolf. Dad never got around to naming him. He had just called the dog Amigo, which means friend in Spanish, and sometimes Jim Amigo, but I never called him that. The mongrel never much liked me, and I never much liked him, and out of spite, I hung the name Jim Ugly on him. He was a one-man dog, Dad's dog, and any time I got too close to my father, there were Jim Ugly's yellow wolf eyes glaring like heat lightning. Dad was buried less than a week ago, the morning of June 3rd, 1894. Jim Ugly was left to me, and me to Jim Ugly, to get along as best as we could. I'd hardly seen him since the funeral. He'd turn up once in a while, but mostly he kept to himself somewhere. "If you won't shoot that infernal mutt, I will." It was my cousin Aurora, who was fully grown, and her gambling man husband, Axie. She was always yelling that Axie was born tired and raised lazy, but I liked him. They were walking back toward the house, and I didn't know I was close by in the weeds. Dad and me had come to stay with them in Blowfly, where they were homesteading with, and Axie was growing about 1,000,000 chickens. Who'd think to look for Dad on a chicken farm? He'd be safe. Safe from that crazy yellow leg who was tracking him with a Colt Army revolver. When I dreamed nightmares, I dreamed of the cavalry sergeant who was with the wide yellow stripes running down the sides of his blue pants. He couldn't still be in the army, not with a brown bowler hat cocked on his head, but he still wore his yellow leg pants stuffed into his boot tops. After the funeral, Aurora decided it was up to her to bring me up. But I just wanted to be left alone. I could bring myself up. "He's the boy's dog now, Aurora," said Axie. "You can't shoot it." "But that mongrel wolf is a sheep killer," Aurora shouted. "There's no proof." "Ed Rippey saw him pull down a sheep, and he'll sue if we don't get rid of the mutt." "Ed is a liar." Aurora's voice had a lot of natural screech in it. "We can't keep a sheep-killing dog. I'll shoot the creature myself, Axie." "Calm down. That dog's all your uncle left Jake." "Except the diamonds." "There are no diamonds, Aurora. Someone in San Francisco had put a $2,500 bounty on Dad's head over some missing diamonds. If I could find out who it was offering the money, I'd turn myself in and collect it myself," Dad had remarked in his rich, soft-edged voice. At first, the price on his head didn't seem to worry him. San Francisco was easy to stay out of. But not long after, we were crossing a muddy street in Monterey, where he had me in boarding school, and the yellow legs started blasting away at him. Dad shoved me down in the mud. In the yelling and confusion, the bounty hunter disappeared. A lead ball had lodged in Dad's right shoulder. But what made him so lightning mad was that the yellow leg had come so close to shooting me. "Jake," he said, "pack your mother's picture and let's make ourselves hard to find." Not long after we settled in at Blowfly, the ball in his shoulder turned sore as a boil. He and Axie rode over to Smoke Tree Junction, where there was a doctor to dig it out. He wouldn't let me go along. He didn't want me any closer to him than necessary, not as long as that yellow leg was within 1,000 miles. The morning he left was the last time I saw him. Aurora was still carrying on about Jim Ugly. "That half-wild dog is apt to turn on us next. I'll shoot it tonight after the boy's asleep, and he won't know it was me. Or care, if you ask me. There's no love lost between those two." I heard the screen door screech open and bang shut, and their voices from the house faded away. I scrambled out of the weeds and around the barn where Axie kept his chickens. They made a constant noise like a room full of squeaky doors. "Jim Ugly!" I called out. He was nowhere about, but I thought I knew where he might have gone. I walked to town and ended up at the cemetery, but he wasn't there either. I expected to find him at the grave, stretched out like the Sphinx and waiting for Dad to rise up and give him a whistle. "Ain't seen that dog of yours," Mrs. Tribble told me. Her back porch looked out over all the headstones, and she couldn't help keeping an eye on things. "He just don't hang around here at all, Jake. Mr. Tribble was over in Smoke Tree Junction yesterday and said he saw him on a hotel porch." I shrugged a little. How do you make a dog understand that someone just wasn't coming back anymore, and there was no point in looking for him in Smoke Tree Junction or anywhere else? I was heading home when I caught sight of Jim Ugly on the road behind me, coming along at a steady wolf trot. Where had he been? Over in Smoke Tree Junction again? I picked up a stone and shied it at him. "Jim Ugly," I shouted, "beat it! You can't go home." The stone raised a blusty bosom of dust where it landed in front of him. He didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me as if I was a pesky boy standing between him and home, and he'd wait until I got out of his way. I heaved another stone and came close to hitting him. "Go on, Jim Ugly," I called. "Tail it out of here. You won't find Dad at Aurora's, so stop looking. And folks won't abide a sheep-killing dog. It don't matter that you did it or not, as long as folks think you're a sheep killer, so clear out." I threw a clod of dirt that exploded on his shoulder and made him flinch. He danced off to one side, but only for a step or two. His small ears stood up sharp as teepees, and his eyes fixed me with a brooding, staffled stare. What was I bothering him for and standing in his way? "Bust and run, unless you want to get shot." I heaved another couple of dirt clods, hitting him both times. Then I turned my back on him, as if to let him know I wanted nothing more to do with him. I continued down the road. When I glanced back, he was sitting on his haunches, his tongue hanging out, and his yellow eyes as sharp as stars. But when I glanced back again, he was following me at a wolf trot. I figured he might be hungry, so I fed him on the back porch. Aurora threw a glance at us and smiled as if she hadn't anything more important on her mind than the pearl buttons she was sewing on a rustling green dress. She had about a dozen copies of the ladies' book and was always gazing moon-eyed at the latest styles. "Jake, be careful that dog don't bite you," she said. "He's half savage, you know. You can't tell what a dog like that's thinking." Well, Dad trusted him. "I ain't your papa. I wouldn't turn my back on him." "He don't bite." Then she said, "Jake, look over those tombstones in the Sears Roebuck catalog. I marked that $6 one in blue marble, guaranteed not to fade. But it's up to you to choose, Jake. They'll carve anything you want to say at 2.5 cents a letter." I tried to ignore the catalog split open on the table. My dad had been a newspaper man and an actor. I didn't think he wanted to be buried under a Sears Roebuck tombstone. "Jake, sure you never saw your papa burying a box or something around here?" "Never," I said. She was at it again, asking questions. "He never told you about a big bag of diamonds? Enough diamonds to hang the sky at night, someone told me?" Who would tell her a thing like that? It was just her imagination working. I could take care of you proper, Jake, if we were to find them diamonds, she said. We could get out of this trifling half-born place and away from these noisy, dim-witted chickens. They're driving me crazy. We could move to San Francisco, Jake, and ride around in carriages and raise a splash. Then she looked straight at me with eyes hot as branding irons. Jake, your papa must have confided in you what he did with that confounded bunch of diamonds. He never said a word, Aurora, I answered, and walked through the screen door to get one of my dad's shirts. I knew that Jim Ugly had a powerful, fine nose. He had once slipped on his robe and tracked Dad 7 miles away over wet ground to a theater in Butte, Montana. Dad said rain freshened the scent, but it wasn't true a dog couldn't track through a river. The scent would flow over the river like fog. He said Jim Ugly was a natural tracker with a nose about 1,000,000 times more powerful than ours. They spent a lot of time together practicing. Jake, I believe Amigo could follow a 3-week-old gravy stain on a man's vest clear to Los Angeles. I found one of my dad's long-armed check shirts, and the touch of it filled me with a sharp longing. I felt the quick rise of tears. I forced them back, swallowing hard. I ambled out behind the barn. I held the shirt close to Jim Ugly's muzzle, and the scent seemed to shoot through him like lightning. He gave a small, anxious yip and pranced around on his big paws. He was acting like a dog, almost friendly, and looked at me as if I must be trying to say that Dad would be back any minute. Axie came over with his hat brim pulled down almost to his eyes, the way he liked to wear it. Jake, turn him loose, he said. He'll be a dead dog by morning. He's a sheep killer. Coyotes about. It could have been coyotes. Most likely was, Jake, but the odds are against your dog. I'll run him off, Axie, I muttered. A half-wild dog like that can take care of himself, Axie said and left. I gave Jim Ugly another sniff of the shirt. Smell that? I said. Where's Dad? Think you can find him? I managed to get a long rope around his neck and tried again. Let's go, I exclaimed. Once he got the idea, he hoisted his tail like a kite. Off we went. He practically dragged me all the way to town, but he didn't turn off to the burying ground. I pointed to the headstones and called, over there! But Jim Ugly wouldn't spare a place a glance. His nose was pulling him along the road, straight toward Smoke Tree Junction, where Dad had been killed. I hauled up on the rope and pointed to the burying ground. This way, Jim Ugly, Dad's in there. Jim Ugly gave me a twitchy look as if to say I didn't have enough brains to know my way outdoors without printed instructions. He turned his bushy tail on me and sniffed the reddish earth. There was no bird dog in him, and he might as well have been holding point straight toward Smoke Tree Junction. My eyes tightened on the tombstones leaning up against the sunset. I knew for a sudden fact what Jim Ugly had known all along. My dad wasn't buried there. His scent wasn't on that rough, hammered-together coffin. The hair on my neck shot up. Axie had lowered an empty box. I sat down on the dirt, hunkering with my arms across my knees, and felt a wave of anger. Why hadn't Axie told me? The funeral was no more than show. What had happened to my dad over in Smoke Tree Junction? Where was he? I jumped up, almost afraid to think what I was thinking. He could still be alive somewhere. And then I warned myself to not get all feverish about it like Aurora and those perishing diamonds. I'd go slow until I knew for sure one way or another. It was clear to me that Axie wasn't going to tell me anything he didn't have to, but I'd head on home. I slipped the rope off Jim Ugly's neck and turned him loose. Go on, I bellowed. Beat it. You can't follow me home. Don't you know what's good for you? Jim Ugly didn't look at me. He stood there staring off at the horizon, but he held his ground. I bellowed at him some more, but I knew I was wasting my breath. For all I knew, he was thinking that where I was, Dad was bound to turn up. He wasn't about to sashay out of there. Not unless I ran off first. He might follow. There was nothing much left in Blowfly to keep me. I turned the idea over in my head for a few steps and then spit in the dust. I'd do it. I'd pick up a few things and be gone. I slipped the rope around Jim Ugly's neck and tied him to an old fence post. Wait here, Jim Ugly, I muttered. If you think Dad's in Smoke Tree Junction, let's have a look. I reckon you've got the nose to find him. We'll read chapter 2 tomorrow.